Hey guys, welcome back to the Syndicate. Today we've got Sean Schantzen on the program. Sean's a healthcare, health tech investor. He's very into the space, and I just want to let him do his intro because he's done quite a lot. So thanks for coming to the program, Sean.
Thanks. I'll give a little bit about my background and what we're doing with Health Rosetta. My background is I was a really early employee at an enterprise SaaS startup in the early days of SaaS. We grew that company pretty sizable and sold it. And then I went to law school after that and was a securities attorney for a couple of years, worked for the guy that represented Ken Lay and all the post-Enron stuff. So I have all sorts of cool stories about that. And then left to start what's now Health Rosetta, that we started out under a different name, Health Funder, and then we combined a couple different things into one thing called Health Rosetta, which is part investor, investing entities, part a nonprofit, and then part an operating company. And it's really focused around a core thesis about how to fix our healthcare system in a grassroots manner that I'm happy to get into. But the basics are that we're using technology and people to drive grassroots change to our healthcare system, and that process happens to surface a huge amount of investing opportunities along the way, and market insight and distribution for the investments we make.
I want to jump into that in a sec, but just looking back, so that startup you were working for, Active Network, $1 billion exit, what was it like joining a company like that in the
So we
early
were,
days?
yeah, so we were acquired by Active. We were a company called Wingate Web. That was great. We're their enterprise. They're now called Lanyon. It's enterprise event management. So like Cisco networkers or Oracle Open World, like the really big tech conferences, we powered basically all of them. And so we were Active was doing a roll up strategy and rolled up us because they didn't have an enterprise platform. They were doing largely triathlons and stuff like that. But it was pretty great ride.
How do you go from startup to studying law to becoming an investor VC healthcare space? It's a strange route.
Yeah, not expected. After the company exited, I was kind of figuring out what to do next, and knew that I wanted a graduate degree of some sort, and had the opportunity to kind of take some time off to do it, and but knew I didn't want to practice forever, so kind of looked around at a bunch of things. I like the kind of analytical rigor of law, and so I also like that it's only 3 years and not 6 years like a PhD, but more valuable, I thought, for what I wanted, at least, than an MBA would be. So decided to go to law school and really wanted to practice for a little bit, so I had some real experience, and got to work for a really great firm. And then when this opportunity came up, it just kind of seemed like the right combination of things, of tech and capital markets experience that I'd had, and so jumped in.
What was it like being a lawyer defending Enron? I have to imagine this was an interesting time.
So I was there after. I worked for the guy that represented Ken Lay, but we were there after Enron, or I was there after Enron. So I got to hear all the stories, but wasn't actually there. We were on a similar suit that was less well known, but about a $30 billion suit. But it was interesting. Like, it's interesting to see the behind the scenes actions of very public figures, we'll say.
How do you take that lawyer hat and turn it into investor hat? You're kind of going from risk averse to slightly more risk, go for it?
Well, I wasn't the greatest attorney. Let's just put it that way. I mean, I liked it. I like it like 15 hours a week, not 80 hours a week. So I don't know that I was necessarily wired to be risk averse. I mean, I'd already been through a startup that had grown rather quickly, and the lawyer side of things was more just the analytical rigor that I liked, and the just general usefulness. Even now, like, just as we're doing all sorts of these weird structures for what we're trying to do with Health Rosetta, just that background is really useful. So I don't know that I was necessarily built to be an attorney long term, we'll say.
Okay. So then you get into the healthcare space. Did you have healthcare experience previously, or is this just identifying the market?
Yeah. So no, I didn't. My partner started Microsoft's healthcare business unit back in the 90s. His name's Dave Chase. He also built and sold a health IT company to WebMD, and has been involved in a bunch of other startups, kind of well known in healthcare. And so he had that experience, and then I have kind of this other tech and law and investing and experience, and it seemed like a good match. And so I've since gotten up to speed on healthcare over the last 4.5 years, but it did not start with much depth. And that gets into a little bit about our models, that we use like a hive mind of experts, about 3,500 people, and technology that manages that hive mind to essentially be able to go deep on any area of healthcare when we need to, because everything's so complex in this space. Honestly, counterintuitive.
Oh, that's healthcare. It's all paperwork and bullshit. Talk to me about Health Funder and the pivot.
Yeah, so Health Funder, we were essentially trying to build E-Trade or AngelList for healthcare, and we did not go the route of raising a bunch of external money. We funded it ourselves, and decided that the likelihood of getting to a true marketplace we thought was unlikely, but we were seeing this expert network having really significant value as an investor. So Health Funder was really associated with crowdfunding and kind of the online investing, and so we just decided that we were going to pivot away to this more impact ecosystem paired with investing model, that the name just didn't fit. And the Health Rosetta is an actual thing. It's like a crowdsourced blueprint on how to purchase benefits intelligently to lower costs and improve outcomes. So think of it as like WordPress for next generation healthcare benefits. So we felt having names surrounding the Health Rosetta made sense, because that's really what we're known for now.
Why doesn't equity crowdfunding work well, or a syndicate model work well for healthcare specifically?
So it's not that I don't think it works well. It doesn't work well in my mind, at least, to be a enormously scalable marketplace type activity. And I think that's kind of panned out in the industry, not just in healthcare, in a lot of areas. Really, no one really has like real transactional liquidity like you have with E-Trade. And I don't think you can get a huge venture backable business that has the sort of return profile you want without that. I mean, that's one thing that makes AngelList so unique, and a couple others in the space, is they got over that hump. And healthcare is so complex and so hard to understand, with so many moving pieces, that people really need a lot of hand holding. And then even the people that are in healthcare, because each area, think of healthcare as not, in the US, it's not like a $3 trillion market, it's like $3,000 billion markets. And so you have people that know like just their silo. And so even if they're just moving a little bit over, in order to make smart investing, they usually don't know the nuances of that, of markets that are adjacent to what they're involved in. And so it means lots and lots of hand-holding, regardless of check size, regardless of deal, because of this complex nature of healthcare that people just don't feel comfortable. And to be honest, there's not a lot of the, like in regular tech investing, there's a lot of really well-known angels that have really prominent names. And in healthcare, you don't necessarily have these sort of almost demigod type people that are really widely recognized, really widely regarded. And so having the same syndicate dynamic, and I think this is represented on even AngelList and other platforms that do the syndicate type models, is that there are very few healthcare type people. So it's just a combination of dynamics that makes it much harder to do in healthcare in a scalable way. And when I mean scalable, I mean like venture backable, and that doesn't mean these aren't good businesses, and there's not enormous opportunity in this space, just not to the level that we thought when we looked at that versus building an entirely new supply chain for healthcare, which is sort of what we're doing now, and investing in that.
I think one of the big challenges with healthcare is the regulations, complexity, and compliance that goes into it. So for startups and investors to both understand, investors could throw money at something, but if they don't know what they're investing in, then especially in healthcare, you're going to get screwed. In SaaS, it's much simpler.
Yeah, and in healthcare, it's worth splitting up into two worlds. There's like the software and services side, which is where we focus, and then there's the life sciences side. So I know nothing about the life sciences side. I'm just not that knowledgeable on it. One of the other pitfalls on the software and services side is that the economic incentives in the U.S. in particular, but everywhere has some version of this, are enormously counterintuitive. And so lots of things that make an enormous amount of sense and may have initial traction, may have a couple $1 million in revenue, are going to stall out, or they do stall out because the incentives are not aligned with adopting the things that seem right to all of us as just normal people. And without going into too many details, that happens all throughout healthcare everywhere, and it makes it very hard to make sense of. So in addition to the compliance and everything, like go-to-market strategies have to be very, very nuanced and very, very focused. Otherwise, people won't get the right types of traction that they need. And I think that's playing out in digital health right now, where we wrote an article called "Why 98% of Digital Health Startups Are Walking Zombies," that some friends gave us some flack for, but we stand by our reasoning on that article.
Does it come down to the prevention versus problem solving? A lot of the best solutions, the ones that save the most money, aren't how the incentives work. People think short term, not long term.
Yeah, I mean, basically, most of our healthcare system in the U.S., the more things you do, the more money you make, regardless of necessity or need. And then you layer this enormous emotional overlay on top of complex transactions or complex diseases and procedures, and it makes it very hard for people to make good decisions when they purchase. And the healthcare system, largely, I think, unintentionally, uses that to their advantage with regard to pricing and all sorts of other things. And so the incentives just don't line up. And so things that make a lot of sense, it's very hard, even if most of the people have very good intentions of wanting to adopt it, all sorts of organizations, it's just hard to do because the end game for a lot of these things is undermining very significant revenue streams for major healthcare organizations. And that makes it very hard for them to adopt internally.
And then isn't there the challenge of insurance companies paying some percentage of the bill, so doctors just mark up the bill so that they get paid what they feel they're worth?
Yeah, hospitals have something called a charge master, which is basically like the prices on a used car lot, your prototypical used car lot. No one actually pays them, except for the most needy, which is really perverse.
If you don't have insurance, you're screwed.
Yeah. And so you get these bills, but no one actually pays that. I mean, all the insurers and everything kind of negotiate down, but even those prices, like we've seen employers that will directly contract and kind of circumvent their insured because they're self-insured, doing deals that are half the cost of the best PPO network discounts, and still profitable for organizations. And so there's a lot of opacity in the pricing in healthcare, which makes it very, very hard to innovate in it, but also it makes it hard as a consumer. But that's moving in the right direction, we'll say.
But let's be honest, as an investor, you're also focused on making money. It's not all bad. Talk about some of the good, the upsides, and what investors need to be looking for in healthcare, health specifically.
So I think the biggest thing that people miss, well, two things. One is go to market. Like rather than like we don't look for companies that are solving huge generic problems. We look for people that are solving the right problem in really successful microcosms. So like I said, healthcare is like $3,000 billion markets. There are like shining lights within that everywhere of things that just work really well. And so we look for companies that are addressing problems within those microcosms and then kind of dominating that market and then spreading out to other areas from there. And the reason for that is that if you get in where the incentives are aligned correctly with whatever it is you're trying to provide, you can have real adoption, you can have real revenue growth, you can have real usage adoption by people, by your customers. And so the go-to-market, identifying that strategy and what area you're going to, it's hard to do and it takes time. Like it's just unavoidable. And I see a lot of investors that aren't as experienced in healthcare kind of seeing the big names of their customers, of companies. It's a big hospital or a big insurer, thinking, great, they got the marquee customer, they can go on their way. And that's not always the case. It's not always not the case, but it's often not the case. That can actually be distracting because you have one term that people use is pilotitis, where lots of healthcare organizations are flush with cash, and so they have pilotitis. And so the things never move beyond these like single department, single facility type pilots. And now the companies are kind of stuck without much real traction. So it's kind of the first thing is this go-to-market thing. And then the second thing is just the distribution of costs, like where money comes from. Everyone else, they throw out these huge numbers, like diabetes costs this much, blah, blah, blah costs this much. But the distribution of those costs is very unusual and almost everywhere in healthcare, and that it's like a hyper-Pareto principle where you have 5 to 10% of patients causing 70 to 90% of the costs in any given area. And so you get this great technology platform that's saying, we're going to use technology to like target these people that are diabetics, and the average diabetic costs X amount of dollars per year. The problem is the people that are going to engage in that platform are very unlikely to be the people that are the most, that 5 to 10%, 20% most costly. And so therefore you're targeting and you have these macro numbers about the market, but then the people that are actually using that technology are not the people that are driving costs. And so that takes a couple of years to surface in the numbers for a company. And so as soon as an employer or a insurer or something sees, wait a second, you said you're going to reduce my average cost by this much, but it's not changing. Well, it's because only 30% of the diabetics are engaging on the platform on a really good day. But those 30% that are engaging are basically the opposite end of the bell curve of the people that are the most costly and the sickest, because the people that are most costly and sickest have family issues, they have multiple diseases, they have lifestyle issues, they have whatever it is. And they don't engage on these things. And so there's a lot of money going into things after these like macro big problems, not understanding where the distribution of cost is and recognizing that solution has to be tailored to targeting and identifying and treating these very small numbers of people that cause very large amounts of costs. One example of this is one of our advisors on everything is the former head of benefits for Walmart. And so he's probably seen more claims data than anyone in the country, just about, providing health care to 1 million people in their health plan. And he's very, very strong opinion about this distribution of cost issues because he's seen so much data. And that can be, I think that's a huge pitfall for investing because the numbers all look really good, particularly early stage at the top level, but they're not engaging in the cost that ROI is not going to play out. So in a couple of years, that company's going to kind of rot on the vine if they can't figure out how to engage those high cost patients. And usually it requires high touch, high service levels, which doesn't lend itself to venture return profiles. So those are the two biggest things, this go-to-market issue and this distribution of cost issue, and making sure the solution is going to target and get into the people that are the high cost people.
You talked about the 1,000 microcosms that make up that $3 trillion market. Can you talk about a startup that you guys have worked with or one that you've seen that has done well attacking one microcosm and then from that expanding outward?
Yeah, so I'll use two examples. One is Hint Health, and they started out as like onboarding and payment and member management for what's called direct primary care, which is basically primary care how you want it to be, where you can go in, you have unlimited visits, there's no co-pays, you pay a certain amount per month, like $50 to $100 a month, $50 to $150 a month, depending on whether you're an employer or buying by yourself. And it's like concierge medicine for the masses. And so what it does, though, is it acts as like the front line of defense against downstream costs for healthcare. And so Hint, by targeting direct primary care, has come to dominate that market where they are for almost everyone. So it's a rapidly growing space, direct primary care, but also that's allowed them to, there's lots of things that are ancillary to that with direct contracting between employers and providers and other types of direct care, it's called, that are beyond just primary care, maybe specialty direct care that's directly contracted or cash paid. And now they're expanding into other areas that allows them to expand beyond that microcosm that itself is rapidly growing. It is a significant market, but there's also a lot more that's going on now as these other markets develop. And then another example is Robin Care, which is a cancer care management play that Rather than targeting like precision oncology or some very specific thing, it's more like a platform for the patient journey. And there's so many clinical and non-clinical issues that go into cost and outcomes around cancer that being able to navigate that journey, going straight to the employer who's paying for the benefits and is the one that's going to see the ROI, is the one that's incentivized to see the person recover quickly, is a unique place because they can own that journey in a way that a lot of others can't.
And then they have the data, and they can do quite a bit with the data, whether that's selling that or providing better coverage.
Yeah, or just providing, but yeah, just getting people to the right type of care at the right time. Itself, I tend to think selling data plays in healthcare are overhyped. There's been a number of companies that have based their models on that and have not done particularly well because the data tends to get commoditized over time unless it's paired with the ability to engage people.
Interesting. So what business models do you see that work specifically well in healthcare?
Um, so,
Or ones that don't, if that makes it easier.
um, so ones that don't, things that use too much technology to target to treat or deal with very high cost small numbers of patients. That's kind of related to one of my prior points. Is that healthcare is a people thing at core, and that's not going to change. When we're sick or we have something terrible happen to us or a family member, yeah, we want the technology there to help support us and everything, but more importantly, we want someone to work with that's going to help us, whether it's a nurse or a doctor. And so things that try to replace that doctor or clinician or caregiver relationship with just pure technology, I think are unlikely to be successful when it comes to things that cost a lot of money. And basically, the more serious something is, the more it costs, typically.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean like the masses of like healthy young people living in San Francisco eating organic food. That's not really the market for healthcare. That's not where healthcare costs are. They're maybe responsible for 10 to 20% of costs. That's not where the money and the waste happens. It happens in all the people that use a lot of healthcare because they're either very sick or they have lifestyle issues or there's pricing failure. Like one facility is $60,000, the other facility is $40,000, and there's no discernible difference as to why, other than that's what they feel like charging, because there's no real pricing competition. That's where all the money is. And so the tech interaction and everything, that can work great for like you and I, maybe you and I or healthy younger people that don't have to deal with the healthcare system much, outside of maybe having children. But for everyone else that's either older or having injuries or having diseases, technology doesn't solve the costs typically for that. It's technology supporting people that does.
Do you guys do B2B and B2C or just B2B?
We B2B and B2B2C. So B2B, like we largely focus on, and our thesis is entirely focused on employers. Employers are the single biggest purchaser of healthcare in the U.S., about 52%. But more importantly, they're the single most profitable customer segment within the entire healthcare system. On average, employers pay about 250% what Medicare does, 260% what Medicare does for the same procedures. And so them changing their habits, we think, has the most significant opportunity to drive systemic change in our healthcare system. And so when we say B2B, we're typically focusing on things that go to employers or are related to what employers want out of benefits in some way. I mean, that's what the Health Rosetta is. So that's what I meant by B2B. And then also for like direct B2C, I think is a very hard thing in healthcare unless you're in a very focused go-to-market strategy and you very much understand that dynamic. B2B2C in our world is someone's selling to employers who are then making it available as part of benefits plans to consumers. So like the cancer care management play I discussed a second ago, it's really the consumers that are benefiting and they're the ones that are interacting with it. But it's the employer that's paying for it because they're the one that's paying for the benefits, for the health plan, for the treatment. So we either think B2B or B2B2C are the best ways.
So you hear a lot of buzz these days about AI, specifically AI taking left brain thinking type jobs. lawyer, doctor, etc., but that nurses would still be very valuable because of the hands-on. Talk to me about what you see as the future merging technology with healthcare.
So I think AI has huge potential within healthcare, just not as much for treating for the actual delivery of healthcare services to very sick people. That doesn't mean it can't be used to better identify those people or predict what they're going to see. But I mean, human nature is not going to change around this topic. I don't think that if you're very sick, if you find out tomorrow that you have congenital heart disease or need a surgery on your knee or cancer or some of these other costly things, rheumatoid arthritis, you want a person. You want that person to have the best technology available to help them do their job better, which has sorely been lacking in healthcare. So there's huge opportunity there. But you want a person, and you want a person that's down the street that's going to come visit you. And nearly everything that shows significant improvement in costs and outcomes has people involved. And many times that doesn't translate when people try to purely digitize that. So I think the future really looks like more like augmented intelligence, where AI and machine learning and data and all these other things are basically enabling people to get to the right people that are sickest at the right time with the right treatment, with the right information, at the right price. And AI will enable that, but that's really just putting it on top of people and saying, okay, now you have way more tools to exercise the judgment or the empathy that's needed to treat this person.
But from a devil's advocate perspective, on average, who would you say is nicer and has more empathy, doctors or nurses?
Nurses.
So what's the
without
one? And doctors are for diagnosis.
Or proceduralists, or quarterbacks of care, because they can deal with the kind of the longitudinal issue of treating diseases. I think most AI and other things is a little early probably to be replacing this kind of multivariate thinking that good doctors can do. I really think of it as like raising the floor from all the not as good doctors, and kind of raising the game rather than replacing them.
That makes sense. If you look at the world's best chess players, it's average chess player combined with AI versus the grandmaster, and the grandmaster loses every time. So taking regular people or high-level people and elevating them.
Exactly, and then also just we've got like changing demographics everywhere in the world, in the U.S. as well, more so in Europe and Japan, but even in the U.S. Where people are getting older, and so even if there's just going to be more demand, and there's not exactly a spiking supply of doctors, and so if you've got more demand from an aging population, you need to have more. They need to have more support to be able to do what they do, which inherently is going to be more technology-based interactions, less in person, more working with nurses. And there's regulatory and other cultural changes that need to happen, but AI is a big part of that as well. And I'm using that very broadly, just technology generally.
I want to jump into the lightning round now, Sean. How's that sound?
Jump into what?
Lightning round, some rapid-fire questions. Sure. What's the first deal you did?
The first deal we did with our fund was Hint Health.
What about you personally?
With Health Funder, our first deal was a company called Pristine that got acquired.
How's the other one doing? Hint Health?
Hint's doing quite well.
Okay. We'll be on the lookout for them. I know you talked about them earlier. What are you excited about today? What gets you fired up?
I'm really excited about employers. I mean, obviously we've staked our entire claim on that and focus on that. One of the kind of very dirty secrets of healthcare is that a lot of times better care costs less for various reasons, because it's either caught earlier or it's done by people that do it more frequently or any number of other reasons. And so employers want to spend less on benefits for multiple reasons. I mean, healthcare costs are the main cause of wage stagnation in the United States. It's the main cause of budget shortfalls on the public side. So potholes in your road, underfunded schools, all of these things are caused by primarily by healthcare costs that have skyrocketed over the last 30 years. And so there's a huge amount of societal ills. And as we've seen in the political process, we're not great as a country.
We're going backwards.
Regardless of your opinions about how healthcare should be paid for. And those conversations are all about who pays, not what you pay for and how you're paying for it. And whereas the employers, they have the ability to fundamentally think through and change what they pay for and how they pay for it. Because most employers, over 100 employees, are or should be self-funded, at least partially, which gives them enormous flexibility to determine what they're paying for and how they're paying for it in ways that benefit employees, not just shifting costs onto them like high deductible health plans, but actually changing the dynamics of what they're paying for. And so I get really excited when I see employers that for 20 years have been spending about half what the status quo costs for healthcare are, with better quality benefits than we've ever seen. And to see that that's replicable by others, that's the whole idea behind the Health Rosetta, is taking those microcosms, aggregating them into a series of best practices that anyone can follow, any company can follow, and have similar results. And so I get really, really excited about, and I'm really hopeful about fixing our healthcare system generally because of the role that employers can play in that. And along with that is going to create, or is creating, just enormous investing opportunities that don't have some of the uncontrollable risk that trying to sell into our incumbent healthcare system has.
Interestingly, I'd say the employer model is actually the problem. So if you look at some socialist states, or more social, like Switzerland, I signed up for healthcare in 5 minutes, and it's so simple because it's all legally mandated.
So that we like to call employer-based healthcare in the U.S. the original sin and the source of redemption. It's definitely the original sin way back in the 40s.
It's like handcuffs.
Yeah, but it is what it is. And so the Affordable Care Act was intended to reduce employer participation in healthcare, and it had the opposite. Well, it didn't change. It went up a little bit, which could be more statistical noise, but it did not have that effect. It's deeply, deeply ingrained in U.S. culture around pay, around jobs, around lots and lots of things. And so that's why if we fix all these, like how and what we pay for using employers, that will lead to the who pays for conversation. Because the reality of adopting a single payer system in the U.S. that is going to immediately work like a Switzerland is, for many, many, many reasons, is very unlikely. Political issues, population, very, very different populations, very, very different health issues, an enormous, highly profitable existing industry that isn't just going away. And actually, Switzerland's model is still controlled in the cantons at a very localized areas. And so we think of employers as the original sin and the original source of redemption, but we also don't think that straight adopting one of the variants of single payer that other countries have is likely to have the effect here that people want it to. And I say that pragmatically, and that's not a political statement in any way. That's just how it actually happen and work. And we just don't see it working.
You can't jump ship without the ship bringing you down. You have to try to save the ship you have. What?
Yeah, it's sort of like a startup. Like you're jumping out of an airplane to build your airplane on the way down. Because healthcare will run the country off a cliff. It's on track to consume 50 to 75% of the entire lifetime earnings of millennials. It is not a trivial thing. It is this. We speak in a bit of hyperbole sometimes in some of our writing, but Dave, my partner, has called it the single greatest imminent threat to the country is the cost of healthcare, because it's the 100-pound gorilla, everything.
It's incredible. It's hands down the worst in the world for that. What anti-portfolio? Anybody you've missed? Any companies you're like, damn?
anti-portfolio. There are a couple companies that we would have liked to have gotten into early. I mean, healthcare really hasn't had any like huge breakouts yet in digital health. Like there's been very few billion-dollar type valuations. So I have lots of companies that I think we've passed on that I think are interesting, but in the traditional anti-portfolio sense, I think it's still a little early to say some of that. I do love, which is a little bit outside of our focus area, which so we probably would have invested anyways, but things like Proteus, which is like nanotechnology for adherence to taking pills that just got their first FDA clearance, just because I think there's huge potential and it's fascinating technology. But even that, the surety of success, I don't think is clear entirely yet, and largely because of these economic incentive things. So I think it's still a little early for me to lay out my anti-portfolio. Clear out. I mean, there's definitely companies we like that we think are interesting, but I think there's a lot of headwinds in the space right now, and it may be a little bit early for a lot of plays from an investing perspective, and especially a lot of plays that have a lot of visibility. Most of the most interesting things that I know of are still in stealth mode of some sort or another.
Well, then I'll give you an even harder question. 15 years out, what does health look like? Give me some bold predictions. Not just healthcare, but health in general.
All right. It's relocalized. Like everyone likes to talk about how we're going to keep aggregating. I think it's going to an extent, but in reality, we want buy local for healthcare in the same way that we want buy local for other things, for most of our day-to-day and everything else that's going on. And so I think there's going to be a significant backlash towards this aggregation that keeps going on, is because as technology matures, you can wire everything up and connect everything without having to have everything owned by a single monolithic entity. And most doctors and nurses and others, they don't really like working at these entities. And so we think there's emerging decentralized models that have the best of conglomeration with the best decentralization. And so I think a lot of very costly acquisitions of physician practices and things that have gone on, and insurers and things that in hindsight are going to look very miss the forest for the trees for where things are going. So that's probably the most common thinking opinion that we have, or that I have, is this move towards decentralization, which is very contrary to what's happening right now.
Makes a lot of sense because every microcosm in every area is different.
Yeah.
What blogs, podcasts, resources, etc. do you look to on a daily, weekly basis to stay informed?
So we write something every week, just about, and so ourselves. Just kidding. The things that I like a lot is there's some. I follow Employee Benefits Advisor quite a bit, just to know what's going on with the purchasing of benefits. Because this is $1.7 trillion of money being spent in our economy every year, all being funneled through very specific small relationships. And so it's a really nice microcosm to see what's going to happen downstream to the rest of the healthcare system by understanding what's happening at that benefits consulting, benefits advisory relationship level. And so that's a non-traditional place to look for most people in healthcare. But it's the root source of everything. It's where purchasing decisions get made for over half of all healthcare spending, and it changes regularly. So things related to that, Employee Benefits Advisor, that sort of stuff. I really like Startup Health's weekly newsletter for just a simple kind of keep myself up to speed. There's a if people want to get really wonky, there's a newsletter that comes out every Saturday night that I'm blanking on the name of for self-funded employers, about the self-funding space, because that's a very big driver behind the scenes of how money gets spent in healthcare, which is like is the root source of what care gets delivered and what people pay for. Um, so those are probably the three things that I pay attention to a lot. Very non-traditional things, like I care more about what like our nonprofit does certification programs, like LEAD for purchasing healthcare benefits. Um, and I care what some of those people that are on the ground in Kansas City, Missouri say more than I do about the CEO of any major healthcare organization or investor or high flying startup or whatever, because they're the ones on the ground seeing what's actually happening.
Last question. I need one call to action for investors. Something that you think people should do, whether they're in healthcare investing or not.
Um, so, call to action for investors is really look at how money flows in our healthcare system and the distribution of costs that underlie all these big numbers that we see. I worry that people are going to get really burnt out on this market, on healthcare, to the detriment of our country and potential returns if investors don't really, really, really deeply understand that. And that usually requires, my favorite people are former executives of major health organizations because they have a very different line than what we hear in the news, typically, especially after a few drinks. So that would be my call to action for investors is go talk to former executives of major healthcare organizations that have kind of distanced themselves a little bit. We're talking like CEOs of major health plans, major hospitals, things like that. They typically have significantly different opinions than they did 10 years ago when they were active. And then call to action for everyone else is healthcare really is fixable. We've seen it in microcosms everywhere. And so all the frustration we experience in the political realm, regardless of your political persuasion, at the microcosm, that's not the case. And so go looking for that in your backyard, and I'm pretty sure you'll find a microcosm that's just working amazingly well.
It's very interesting. I had Esther Dyson on, actually, was recording the interview yesterday, and
Yeah,
she's very active in this space as well.
yeah. We're like her, yeah. Um, Road to Wellville stuff that she's doing is
Mm-hmm.
an exact example of this issue of making microcosms work and focusing on like the social determinants of health. We're almost like the predecessor behind that of saying, in order to do all that stuff, you've got to free up resources that are being misallocated right now, and employers are the best place to do that from. So Road to Wellville is one of these microcosms that I think is great.
Sean, where's the best place for people to reach out to you? I know you're a busy guy.
So probably LinkedIn. I'm pretty, Dave is the Twitter famous one. So if you want to reach out to us, at Chase Dave on Twitter, is Dave Chase. Um, and that's by proxy, me. And then for me personally, usually through LinkedIn. We have one Twitter famous person. We don't need two. So he does that side of things, and I do lots of other stuff that we do.
Always send the contacts and emails to the better half. Then freeze everything up. Thanks for coming on today, Sean.
All right. Thanks a lot for the time, Matt.
And thanks for tuning in, guys. If you've liked this, reach out to Sean. Tell him he's awesome. If you're a real estate investor, or not real estate, a healthcare investor, he might be interested in having you guys on board. Shoot him an email. If you like this, thesyndicate.vc, make sure to subscribe. Leave us a review in iTunes. I know it's horrible, but it helps us reach more investors, VCs, operators. So you guys know the spiel. Until next time, I'll talk to you later. Cheers.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thanks.
Sean.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was good.